You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Freight Plus. I'm your host, Kyle McNaught. Thanks for checking us out. It's an SCU30 day today. It's Supply Chain Under 30, where we talk to supply chain professionals under or at the age of 30 to talk about the work that they're doing and the career path that brought them into this fun industry we all work in. Really, the whole idea of this series is to shed light on the different career paths, the different journeys, and some really kind of best practices if you're looking to kind of get a start in there. So I can't wait for this next SCU30 because she comes highly recommended by one of my favorite people in the world, Kayla Thorne. So massive shout out to Kayla. Loved working for her when I was at the NFPA, but she said you just have to talk to Victoria. And today we're going to talk to Victoria. Victoria Brown has had a crazy career, so many cool things, and I just am so excited. She says connecting supply chains around the world one solution at a time. She sits on a ton of boards, including the Young Professionals Board as the vice chair for the CSCMP, the Council of Supply Chain Professionals. She sat on the Boston board for the APICS, was the award, one of the first scholarship recipients of the Achieving Women's Excellence in Supply Chain Operations Management and Education Scholarship, and just an all-around awesome person. So without further ado, Victoria, how's it going?
It is going. Excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And also thanks for Kayla for the introduction. But yeah, excited to share some of my journey with you guys.
Oh, I'm so excited because you have such a fascinating journey, so many cool things, all the things I love that people kind of take advantage of, especially when you're young. So let's start it off. Victoria, talk to me a little about this is why I need to slow down, Kyle. Victoria, talk to me a little bit about growing up. Kind of where'd you grow up? What did you do? What were you interested in? That type of stuff.
Yeah, I grew up in north central Connecticut, just outside of Hartford, between Hartford and Springfield, Mass. Pretty relatively standard childhood, but I loved math. I was always the math nerd who always had to be the overachiever. And then it kind of expanded into sciences in high school. I was that kid who decided to take AP Chem, AP Physics, and Organic Chemistry all together as a junior. And yeah, that's to give you perspective on my nerdy side. So definitely an adventurous scholastic adventure. But yeah, I grew up single parent household, which definitely I think shaped me, seeing my mom be a fabulous rock star, and really just taught me that anything's possible if you put your mind to it. But yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, listen, I'm all about the math nerds. My wife's got her PhD in math. I love it. Like, you guys think differently. You don't think like it is so different hearing a story from her compared to me. But yeah, I love it. So you were into kind of more of the math, the science, and stuff like that. I mean, that course load alone your junior year is insane. What did you play any sports, or was it all just you were a mathlete, not an athlete?
A little bit of everything. So actually, I was on varsity cheerleading when we went to nationals my freshman year. Then I unfortunately had to have foot surgery, so I couldn't do anything that was that like standing. So I swam. So I did swim team, and then I also managed the wrestling team, which being very good with numbers for like tracking sports is actually really important. And like referees trust you more when you're extremely on the math and the numbers. So yeah, so just lots of different moving parts. I was also part of FBLA, Future Business Leaders America, and a few others. Yeah.
You were moneyballing your high school wrestling team?
I mean, I was teaching them how the math would work based on how the referee was calling the shots. So right. Yeah, a little bit different.
Oh, geez, that's awesome. This is crazy. What about technology? What did you have? I mean, that's kind of the cool thing about this, especially as like if later in life, right, you get into the workforce, you find like not everyone grew up with this stuff. When did you get your first smartphone?
I got my first smartphone at 23 years old after I graduated undergrad. So yeah, I didn't have a smartphone. And iPhones came out when I was a senior in high school, freshman in college. So they were still like getting there. I remember I got texting for my 18th birthday and I was really excited to be able to text people. So I didn't have much technology growing up. But I do know, so senior year of high school, I had taken all those APs. Junior year, I didn't have much left I could take. So I started taking classes at the community college in town and I actually took an intro to programming class. I was the only girl in the class, which was eye-opening to me because I'd never thought about that. I'd never even noticed that there was a ratio imbalance in any of my other classes. But the teacher used to just kind of like give me free reign to code whatever I wanted. I mean, granted, we were using like Quick Basic and Visual Basic, so really elementary style, but I actually used to go to competitions with it and compete against other high schoolers in coding. So yeah, that was fun.
Oh my gosh, that is awesome. That's a really cool thing. Like I've never thought of like I was taking dumb classes, right? I'm a communications major. So my classes were like cool, like how much swim I did swim class because I grew up in Florida, so we did that, which just meant I learned how to do gainers off the back on the diving board because like we had swim kids in the class also. But yeah, so much smarter than me, so much brighter. Did you? So you kind of found some cool things. I mean, were you working? Kind of, what were you doing? I mean, you talk a little bit about that single parent. Was that kind of you were just right off
Yeah.
the bat, work, work,
So
work?
I started working a part-time job alongside school at 15 years old. So I started as a camp counselor because that's, if you're under 16, there's only so many things you can do. So I worked at the Y as a camp counselor. Then as soon as I turned 16, I actually got hired to work at Six Flags as a lifeguard. But I quickly moved up through the ranks. So while I was still 16, I got promoted to be a head guard, which means you run all the chemical readings, you put people on break, like you're pretty much organizing the chaos. You're kind of like the operations manager of your area of the water park. But yeah, I did that in the summers. So I would work all throughout the summers as much as I could. When you're under 18, you're limited on hours. But as soon as I turned 18, I was working not only at the water park, usually 5 to 6 days a week, but also I was working at a fast food chain, and I was also working at a gym teaching swim lessons. So yeah, I was working 3 jobs the entire year before I went off to college
Ah,
while finishing high school.
and, and going to community college. You're like,
Yes,
wow,
I
wow.
didn't
Talk about
sleep
it.
much. I
Yeah,
didn't sleep much.
yeah. Do it when you're young, right? When you're older, sleep's not easy anymore. That's awesome. I actually was sort of the same. I lifeguard all that stuff again. Grew up in Florida. Worked at the Y. I did all that. I can't believe that you were head lifeguard at 16 at Six Flags. Like that is
Yeah,
chaos. Like just
was.
like this is a little insider lifeguard talk now. No longer supply chain stuff. I always laugh, like, because Florida, we had all the beaches, so I knew a bunch of beach lifeguards and made fun of them because they actually had to work. I mean, a pool lifeguard's like the easiest job there is, but you decided, like, no, I need to be a little bit harder and actually get something that's kind of complicated in the water, huh? That must have
Yeah,
been nuts.
they knew that I was a little bit nerdy when I started encouraging. We had to do cycle counting to understand how many people were going down the slides each hour. How many folks were coming through each pool each hour. And when I was encouraging them to use physics equations to figure out the throughput speeds, yeah, that's when they started being like, "Oh, I don't know where this is coming from." So
They're
yeah.
like, make her head, make her head, make her head. Like, we don't know what we're doing. Um, Wow. So you already at 16 are thinking this way. Kind of what was your next step? I mean, you had some really good work and stuff like that, like just working your butt off and barely sleeping. When it came time to graduation and stuff, where were you kind of headed? What were you thinking you were going to kind of do?
So I had always thought I was going to study actuarial math, which like most people are like, what even is that? I loved numbers, and I had talked to some family members who were also math focused, and I had mentioned, oh, I really like math, and I had mentioned accounting. They said you don't want to be an accountant because you don't get to actually use math. You're just really focused on just different areas, and so everyone pushed me to actuarial. Actuarial is really rare. It's only offered apparently at like 80 something universities in the country. And I'm from the Northeast. I'm in New England, and there was only 3 schools at the time that I was applying in New England that had actuarial mathematics. And so I only really looked New England, New York, Pennsylvania, kind of that like Northeast
You
chunk
want to
of the.
stay cold. Yeah.
Yeah, not that I really wanted to see cold, but I just didn't know how far away I wanted to be from family at that point. And yeah, so I actually applied to college intending to study actuarial math, and I intended to minor in computer science after that crazy experience coding that I just totally loved. So I ended up applying to 9 schools, and I ultimately chose to go to WPI in Worcester, Mass, Worcester Polytech, just because It's a project-based curriculum, and if you're not familiar with the school, it runs on quarters. So every quarter you're in different classes, and you take 3 classes at a time. And it's hyper focused, and you jump in real fast. But then everything is, when I say project-based, everything culminates in projects. So instead of taking tests in every topic, which you do take some tests, especially in the earlier classes, it's much more focused on taking what you learned and applying it to real world situations. And that really spoke to me, is that I was like, okay, it's great if I can pass a test, but if I can't actually do anything with it, how am I ever going to get a job? Right. So I really liked that, spoke to me about the curriculum. And so I went there. Freshman year, calculus kicked my butt, and quickly realized that maybe math wasn't my path, even though I had for my entire life been so convinced math was going to be my path. I talked to some upperclassmen, and they said, look, if you like math, but calculus isn't your jam, but you still want to be looking at problems and solving them, you should really check out industrial engineering, because it's problem solving with people. Because supply chain, industrial really is just supply chain, is you're taking the math and the patterns, and you're finding the anomalies, and you're working with other people to work through it. I had an internship coding the summer between my senior year of high school and freshman year of college. And I had quickly realized that I needed more human interaction. Like, I couldn't just stare at the screen all day. I needed humans. And so when they described that to me, I was like, okay, like that sounds perfect. And so I switched over end of my freshman year of college.
How did that work? Were you kind of, I mean, especially if your whole life before was like, I'm going to be a mathlete, I'm going to kick math's butt, and I'm going to end.
Uh,
Like, did you were you able to transition, or were you sort of like, oh wait, my life just got flipped upside down, I'm
well,
fresh prince in this?
I had a few good cries about it when I was like, calculus is not my friend. Like, this has never happened to me before, where math has not been my friend. It was scary. I actually thought about transferring out of WPI because I didn't know really what my options were if math wasn't going to be my path. I was like, do I go to switch for business? Do I study business instead? Like, I didn't know what to do. And that was hard. And it definitely took some time, and me realizing that I was in a really good place. Like, I really loved the challenges that I had at WPI, and the friend group I made was amazing. I didn't really want to leave that. And so that's when I had been talking to upperclassmen about what were my options. And so I met a few other women in my sorority who had also studied actuarial and transitioned to industrial engineering. So yeah, it was not easy. I will say that for me, like mentally, but class wise, I mean, freshman year, most of your classes are very similar, your basic maths, your basic sciences, and any humanities. So the transition academically was not too difficult.
That's it. I mean, it's interesting, right? A lot of times, like, I think in particular, I mean, you kind of get in the class, you hit something hard, and you don't think of like, hold up, I probably should think about, like, is this something I want to be in? So that's interesting that you're able to do it as a freshman. I mean, most people kind of get it when they're in the career themselves. So like, oh wait, this kind of stinks. Why am I doing this? Let's
It's
continue.
part of like that, those internship experiences, like after I was in as like coding all day, I was like, okay, I just need a human. Like, I need to talk to someone. And that was a reality for me. And so combined with the calculus situation, I realized that, yeah, there had to be another way.
And that's what's so important about the internships, right? You get to have those experiences where it's not like, oh no, this I got bills to pay, I gotta eat, I gotta kind of like fix stuff. Like, you can do this before you have all that type of stuff, which is really where experience comes into play. Um, let's keep going. I mean, what kind of, so you made that transition, you've industrial engineering, kind of what kind of was the rest of the career path, and how did you end up kind of getting into supply chain with your education?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't even know how I transitioned really. So I was studying, and we had career fairs on campus each year, twice a year, where all these employers would come to campus. And, I attended one and visited a few different booths and explained at that point. So between freshman and sophomore year of college, I actually went back and worked back at the theme park, for another summer. And I was really like, okay, I was kind of trying to figure out, like, what is my true path? What is my true north? What am I trying to do if this is what I'm studying? And that's when I realized that I was literally living in a supply chain. Like, theme parks are queuing theory and, supply chain just under the operations guise. And so as I went to those career fairs, they start in September. So it was right after summer. and I was talking to a couple different employers. I was mentioning, oh yeah, like I was an ops manager in this situation, and I had this experience, and it was mostly people management. But we have queuing theory and whatever. And they were like, hold up, you like actually manage people and you understand the concepts because you've worked them in real life. And that actually led me to an internship in traffic logistics. So I was in a traffic center, yeah, working trucking fleet. So with the truck drivers, and in the internship, I was given the task of save us fuel, figure it out, like just figure out a way to save us fuel. At the time, I think gas was like almost $5 a gallon. Um, so they were like, any pennies you can save us is going to go a long way. And that was when I started using my math background to pull out, numbers about like which trailers. We had about 75 tractors. Which tractors on which runs? When were they sitting idle? When were they actually moving? What was their average gallons per mile? And in that process, as I was creating, different groupings and leveraging that analysis, I got to sit down with all the truck drivers and understand, okay guys, like if you had to do this, how would you do it? And I learned about just getting that buy-in and that consensus. It was an amazing experience, and I had great exposure. Yeah, and that really triggered, like, this was real life application of something that we all live through, right? Like people ride in cars and trains and buses every day. um, so how do you apply that? And it was just so practical that it was a really easy transition.
And it's a fun one too. I mean, it's the idea
Mhm.
that it's real life, right? It's not just
Yes,
like I'm doing something that like you can tangibly see
yes.
it moving, and you got to see this in an internship.
Oh
I mean,
yeah, I went on ride-alongs. I would ride in the tractor trailers with them. The drivers at first were a little bit skeptical of me, but I made friends.
yeah, I can imagine. You're friendly, you're open. There's probably a blast to talk to you, and it's kind of cool to kind of get to see someone else's point of view. I mean, so you got that fun experience. What was kind of like? How did you take that kind of lessons learned there and kind of start to apply it to like, okay, I'm about to like graduate. It's kind of start to take the next step in my career. How did you use that stuff?
So the next summer, I actually had a different internship. So that was between sophomore and junior year. Then I went, and even though that employer asked for me to come back, I said, look, to your point, internships are time to figure out what you do want and you don't want. And I just want to make sure. I'm a very much so like a what if, or like, well, what if? So I didn't ever want to second guess a decision to go work full time for someone if I hadn't investigated all my options. And so I actually went to a different consumer goods company. And there I worked in the warehouse. So now I had traffic exposure. I worked in their warehouse, and they were actually redesigning their entire warehouse. So my project for the summer was to redesign their entire warehouse based off of what I knew, and what I was learning. And just, I got to learn about, widths of fork trucks and aisles, and how you put in different sprinkler systems into the racking, and like different warehouse management systems. Like that was the best exposure because I literally got to learn how to design an entire warehouse from the ground up.
And you're learning the new technology. You're learning all this stuff like as an intern. Like, I
Mhm.
think that's more one of the also like things to me is like, wow, they have interns doing this. You would think like a warehouse redesign would be something like I'm sure that you had sponsors and you had people kind of helping you through all that stuff. But I mean,
Debatable. I mean, it was, yes, there was managers, but they were more of like a checking point. Like I'd come to them and say, okay, this is everything I did. This is why we're doing it. This is how it's going to work. Here's the steps. Here's the process. Can you sign? They'd be like, okay.
they're like, oh, okay, please don't tell me I got to do more. Uh, how was the technology? I mean, that's kind of one of the interesting things too, because you're in school kind of learning theory, but like you say, WPI is awesome because it's project based. I mean, how was the technology gap? How did you find like, especially with something like a WMS? Like, did you find that
Uh,
you were able to work with that quicker than kind of some of your colleagues, just because
yeah.
maybe you've just grown up a little bit more with technology than them?
So, I mean, it varied. At my internship when I was working in a traffic center, our TMS was homegrown, legacy, not very robust. And so I did everything in Excel, pivot tables, pulled out all the numbers. Like I built everything in Excel. Excel's my best friend in that case. And I was also using solver functions and add-ons and things that you geek out on when you get to know Excel much more. But when I got to the WMS system, it was, a well-known ERP branded WMS, and it was in transition at the time. Now, mind you, this was 2010 timeframe, so a little over 10 years ago, and it was definitely, after having had exposure to seeing the WMS at the first internship had been really robust. After seeing that and then switching to this other one, I was like, wait, but it doesn't have this functionality or that functionality. And I quickly learned that technology is going to be widely different depending on the provider. And sometimes you just have to make do with what you have, and other times you can make suggestions back, which is ultimately what I do today. But obviously there was a long road between there, and so yeah,
And,
it was eye opening.
yeah. I mean, especially because, I mean, people can go to your LinkedIn and see these kind of consumer goods that you were talking about. It's not like you were working for mom and pop shops. Like, you were working for large consumer goods enterprises. So it's fascinating, just like the difference in technology. I guess, I mean, I love the interns. I love all that stuff. Kind of how was still like, so let's keep going. Continue
Oh,
this journey.
yeah. So I got to graduation year, so senior year of college. I'm applying for jobs. It's fall of my senior year, so we're talking 8 months before I'm graduating. Once again, career fair on campus. I go talk to a handful of people. I ended up interviewing with 9 companies, all very different roles. I had supply chain roles. I had technology roles. I had like the gamut. I had defense contracting. I had consumer goods. It was a very wide array. Ultimately came down to I ended up getting offers from both the internship companies as well as a few of the ones I'd interviewed with. And I ultimately actually chose to go to it's still consumer goods, but in a different manner. I actually ended up going to Vistaprint as a software quality engineer. So I actually started my path back in software, where I was originally like, oh, I need humans. But the culture really spoke to me. They were on 3-week release cycles, which if you're in tech, 3 weeks is crazy. Like every 3 weeks we had a new release going out. We were manufacturing all of our own goods. If you know anything about Vistaprint, the 500 free business cards, they patented the way you cut the business cards, which is like their bread and butter. And so them creating their own supply chain best practices was what really originally set them apart. So I was super excited because not only were we designing our own supply chain, but we were curating it and changing it and iterating every 3 weeks. So it was very fast paced. And after WPI, where we were on 7-week terms, 7-week cycles, that really spoke to like just the fast pace. Like I just really enjoy, I can't sit still. If anything you take away from this, I don't sit still. I have to be involved in something ongoing.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I immediately saw that, and I was like, "Oh, geez, like she's a hard worker." And that's all. I mean, that's one of the cool things too, especially when it comes to the internships. You put your whole heart into it. You worked it. It wasn't an internship. It wasn't like, "Oh gosh, I'm here for the summer." You got job offers because you approached it the right way, and that's kind of one of the things that like a lot of people kind of, I think. A ton of people don't recognize like there's a lot of value in learning what you like and don't like. But at the same time, you're building a network, you're creating contacts, you're building this kind of like you talk a lot about your mentorships and your kind of like groups and your networks and stuff like that. I mean, that's one of the most valuable things of internships is like when you get to the real world, you can pick up the phone and be like, what's going on, Joe? Like, Joe the driver, talk to me a little bit about this. Is this a real thing? Or like I'm hearing this from the Vistaprint people.
And I do that today where I call friends from any other place I've been or worked, or just friends who I've made through the different professional organizations to bounce ideas off of them. Because this industry, while it's big, it's not that big. And so you get to know folks, and it's just I love having that dynamic dialogue and just being like, hey, what about this? What do you think about this? But yeah. But yeah, so I worked at Vistaprint for about a year, and then I quickly realized, like I said, like I needed humans, and I had missed that fast-paced frontline, steel-toe boots, hairnet, like on the floor kind of environment. So I actually went back to one of the companies that had been an intern. Where I'd interned. They approached me and said, "We're expanding. We're adding on a few million more square feet. Like we definitely need people who know how to hit the ground running." So I actually went back. I worked full time, and I worked third shift manufacturing. So I remember in my exit interview for Vistaprint, they're like, "Wait, so you're leaving a company where everyone's in their early 20s, we have a super fun culture, to go work third shift in the middle of nowhere?" I was like, "Yeah, uh-huh. Why?" And at that point, I had really realized that to get to where I wanted to go, I couldn't keep on the path that I was, and I needed to continue to learn and get that frontline exposure. And I had an amazing mentor who I still talk to this day, who was a professor in undergrad, who had said, really early on at 20 years old, she made us all sit down and plan our entire career path. And we were like, we're 20, we don't know what we want to do until we're in our, late 60s. And she had said, if you never make a plan, you'll never know if you're progressing in the direction you want to go. So set yourself up with 5-year benchmarks, and make a list of each skill you're going to need to move from point A to point B and from B to C. And if you know what things you need to learn, you'll continue to grow and you'll continue to develop. And so I had realized like I wasn't going to get to where I wanted to go on the path I was on. And so I had to do a little bit of a redirect.
Wow, that's amazing tip. That's great. I kind of wish I'm going to start doing that now because I'm like, oh, what am I doing? That's awesome. So I mean that explains so much, especially because like you continue to grow, right? So you get to this kind of this consumer goods, working this new stuff. Kind of, what was that experience? Kind of, what were you learning there? And then kind of, what was the major? Like, what's the end goal? Like, what are you trying to? Where are you going? Because like the sheer amount of stuff you have on your plate right now is insane. Like where are you trying to learn and where are you aiming for?
So I had thought this was my goal when I was 20. My goal has changed. I don't even know what it is anymore, but it's which is the beauty of it. When you learn what you like, you continue to your goals continue to evolve. But I had at that point I was managing a warehouse, so in the manufacturing environment. So I had about 1.5 million square feet of warehouse. Um, we were handling about 120 to 150 loadouts a day. On my shift, I was doing about 40 to 50 of those, about 40 to 50 material handlers per shift. Warehouse maintenance, about 6 to 8 maintenance guys. Yeah, it was a full operation, bulk, each is parcel. We were doing case pick, and we were adding automation. So we were installing a WCS on top of our WMS. So yeah, so lots of moving parts, great exposure. But I remember, it's third shift, so it's exhausting. The first couple of weeks you work third shift, you're just mentally like you don't know when to sleep or when to eat or when to do like anything. And so that was an adventure. And I remember, gosh, probably like week 2, the guy who was training me, love him, we still keep in touch, but he was hard on me, and he had specifically said like, I don't think that you're cut out for this, because people come in here and they're either tech smart or they're people smart, and in this role you need to be both. And he didn't know me yet, and I was also exhausted, so I was definitely not my normal bubbly self, right? And the reality is, and anyone who works the front lines knows this, like you need your team to be behind you if you're going to move the mission forward. And if you don't get buy-in from your frontline associates, you're doomed. But also on the other side, if you don't understand what's happening in your facility because you don't understand the technology, you're also going to really struggle. And so in his mind, he saw me as like someone who was super tech savvy, but he didn't know me as a person yet. And so I remember taking it on as like a personal challenge, like, what, you're assuming that I don't know how to work with other people or get along or communicate? And that really struck me, because that was something I had always wanted to be part of, was like working with other people. And I think it lit a fire. And so I took it upon myself to like learn the ins and outs of every system, but also to get to know every single person on my shift and the other shifts, and get to know like what makes them tick, like what is it that they're excited about, what motivates them. And yeah, so great exposure. But I think I had always set as my end goal when I was, in college, that goal that I had set was that I wanted to be a domain expert in something in supply chain. I didn't know what area of supply chain, but I wanted to really be able to help others, like take knowledge and teach, whether that be in a big organization helping lots of different locations, or as an independent, consultant type role where I went to a lot of different organizations. And that was what I had set as my goal, is like, okay, become an expert, help others move the mission forward across the entire field, essentially. And so I knew I needed to continue to get those skills, get that exposure. But yeah, so I did that for a few years. But to that point of reassessing, I was doing grad school at the same time, part-time if you're working third shift, I was going in at like 8, 9 or 10 p.m. I was getting out around noon. I would go home, I'd sleep for a couple hours, and then I would have class from 6 to 9 and then go right back to work. So I was not a functioning human. Like I was sleeping maybe 3 or 4 hours a day. And it was not sustainable. And so after a couple of years of that, I decided to quit and go back to grad school full time.
Oh, a couple
Yeah.
of years of 3 hours of sleep. That's it? Jeez, Victoria, what the hell? Wait.
Fun fact, I don't drink coffee, and everyone's always amazed that I don't drink coffee and I slept that little, and I don't drink energy drinks. I just have a lot of energy very naturally.
Yeah, gee, what the hell with this guy? You're still friends with him, but what the hell was he saying that you're like not peppy, like you can't talk? You're like, I'm doing 3 hours of sleep, man. Come on.
Week 2. after that, he learned, he got to know me and acknowledged that. But
He's like, my bad.
yeah, after that, he's like, oh, you surprised me.
So where did the passion come from when it comes to the supply chain? What did you see? Because like this, like you're saying, this isn't easy work, right? This wasn't something that like, oh man, this is simple. I'm like really cruising. Like you've got to have a passion to be able to A, take on that work. B, when you get exhausted of that work, be like, you know what I need to do? Hit grad school. Like, where did you find this passion
I
with the
just
supply chain?
I've always been a problem solver. It's not so much about that it's supply chain, but if you really think supply chain in grandiose terms is problem solving. Like you're looking at a situation and you're figuring out what is working well and what isn't working well and how do you fix it and then how do you make it better across the board. And so I've always been the person who's like, hey, that looks kind of funny. What if we did it this other way, and making suggestions. And so I just think it translated really well into the field. And I don't know, I am one of those people who likes to see things through and make sure they get done. And so I do think that that probably tied into it as well as like the supply chain doesn't end, right? We're always moving things. And
Yeah.
so it keeps rolling. So
That's, I mean, it's interesting, especially just the idea that it is problem solving. But I think it's one of the cool,
yeah.
especially because they talk a lot about like the under 30 crowd wants to do nonprofit stuff. They want to find passion where they can really help out. And I think supply chain is one of those interesting things where you're problem solving, but you're problem solving for like a greater good in the sense that you're moving things through to really help out and get stuff to people that they needed. I mean, we just experienced COVID, right? The whole empty toilet paper. I mean, everyone take the sip of whatever you're drinking. Just we've all experienced what a supply chain failure looks like, and I think it's one of the really interesting things. It's problem solving, but the stakes are higher, almost in a sense. So for you, it must have been a blast. Let's keep this journey going. Grad school, that must have been a good break for you, huh?
It actually, it was a nice reset. So when you
Believe
work
it.
in operations, when you work in operations, you spend so much time putting out fires, just trying to keep the business running, that you don't get a lot of time to do like the analytical side of things, which is what I really enjoy. It's like like understanding the problem and decomposing it and figuring out the root cause. In an ops environment, you just need to fix it. Like you just need to go, and there's no time to sit and think about what could be done differently, right? Um,
And this is coming from you too. I think that's one of the like, because a lot of times people think like, oh man, there's just no time. But like, I'm just also my brain can't think that way. You're the brain that can think. How could I solve this and automate this and fix this? And even you're like, there isn't enough time to figure this out. I mean,
yeah.
that's one of the more interesting things about it all. Sorry. So continue with the grad school. How did you get there?
Yeah, so I went back. So WPI offers a tuition incentive to alumni um, who went there for undergrad. So they, give a discount if you went there for undergrad, if you go full time to grad school. So I did that, while I was studying. So I was actually, it was a TA. So once again, I can't sit still. Yeah. So I taught what's known as like the clock lab, but it's pretty much like Legos in an assembly line style where you just let people loose and you're like, build this clock. And at first they're like, I don't know what I'm doing because it's so disorganized. And then they slowly figure out how to iterate. And so you're teaching people how to do like process improvement by step alteration of the process using like DMAIC, design, measure, analyze, influence, control type process stuff. So that was really fun. But I was realizing like I like teaching people and I like educating people. There was a position that came available as an industry analyst. Which for those of you who aren't familiar, industry analysts, I like to say that it's kind of like being a translator. You explain the technology to the business people or the operations people, and you explain the business or operations to the technology people. And you're that intermediary that explains the two worlds to each other. And that I applied for a position and ended up getting it, which was really cool. And so I worked as an industry analyst for IDC for 5 years. But that was amazing because I got to have this great exposure, experience and kind of play that go between. And it was really interesting because being that young, I mean, I started as an industry analyst. This is really scary to think about. And any of my past clients watch this, they're going to be like, oh, shoot. I started as an industry analyst just before my 25th birthday. So, being that young, I always make sure to get on the phone with my clients before I ever met them in person, because if I had a great conversation on the phone talking through the logistics of how their warehouse was working and what was going right, what was going wrong, or with my tech providers and talking through the strategy of what the market needed, we would have a great dialogue. And then they'd meet me in person and they'd size me up and they'd be like, you're like 12. And so it was a really interesting, difficult dynamic, and I really struggled with it in the beginning. It probably took me about a year before I was comfortable, because you have to remember, like, I had this inferiority complex of like, I'm not good enough. What do I know that they don't know when they have way more experience than I do? But what I quickly realized, or it took me about a year to realize, is that it was more the translation point that was the important piece. It was being able to be that go between and aggregate the information. But I really did struggle in the beginning, feeling like I wasn't knowledgeable enough, or that I didn't like, how was I supposed to advise someone who'd been in the industry for 20 plus years? So yeah, so it was definitely a very interesting dynamic shift.
But I'm surprised. I would have assumed you would have been a home run like the day one for you, because I mean, you sat when you talked to truckers, you gotten to like have that experience of even younger, even more of like an 11-year-old at that point. But you've been in the professional world. Like it's one of those like. But I think you're right in the sense that we all struggle with the
Yeah.
imposter syndrome.
And
But
I think, I had this great manager early on, when I was working third shift, who had really said, when you know your business cold, people can't question it. And so he always really encouraged me to ask questions, learn the business, know the business, so that when folks would come to you, like there was no disputing your age because you knew your business. And so that was his like encouragement to me to really build up my arsenal of knowledge. But still think about it, like when you are straight out of undergrad, I mean, granted at this point I was several years into working and through a master's program, but like it's intimidating, right? Like it's intimidating when you're new to the workforce and you don't know what you don't know, and all you see is all these folks with 20 or 30 years of work experience, and you're like, what could I possibly bring to the table that they don't already know? And so that was when I had to do like a mental reset of like, okay, it's not that I know things that they don't know, it's that I'm collecting information across 20 different technology providers and across hundreds of end users, and it's the aggregating of that knowledge that's what's important. And so I really had to like talk myself off the like you do know this, like these things, so that
right.
was definitely an
Well,
experience. I loved it, and I loved teaching people, and that was, I mean, it was great. I so enjoyed that, and I had a great team. Like my manager was amazing, like everyone I worked with was fabulous, the culture was on point.
oh man, I could see it, because like you say, right? It's most of the time you're just putting out fires. So the idea that you get to kind of take that step back, you get the time, right? That's the big thing, was you had time as this consultant. You got to really digest all this stuff, because most of the time you're just putting out fires. You have no time to go, what's the newest technology? How's this actually work? How's this thing kind of being implemented? And then how do I even communicate it? Because I think if anything, communication, believe it or not, folks, when you listen to this, it is the hardest part about business. Trying to talk to business people about what ops people are doing, talking to ops people about how the business needs to run, all these things kind of accumulate, and it becomes very difficult, because half the time you're like, I think we speak the same language, but I don't think you're translating what I'm saying, uh, which is it. It's frustrating to say the least, but it's an interesting thing. I love the path that you're taking on. So 5 years of that, I think we're kind of coming to kind of more present day. Talk to
Yeah.
me a little bit about that, because we're about to hit coronavirus time, which I can't wait to hear how you're taking all this kind of
uh,
stuff.
oh yeah, so that was gosh, okay, so now we're in December of 2018. I have just found out, I decided, because I can't sit still, that I wanted to apply to MIT's master program in supply chain. Um, I had worked for MIT during my first master's, so I'd been on the campus quite a bit. I also, sitting on the board for Boston Apex, had gotten to know the program and many of its alumni, and I really respected the professors and the content. It was just so interesting to me. I find out in December that I get in. I'm absolutely stunned and floored and like amazed and like, are you sure you actually wanted to let me in? It was like kind of like a weird feeling of like, I feel like I apply because I think I can do this, but also like, are you sure you should have let me in?
Right. Have you
Um,
seen me in person? I look like a 12-year-old. You're like,
exactly,
you gotta see me. I'm
yeah.
older.
Um, so I find that out, and I also find out that I'm a finalist for the Awesome Scholarship, which was the first year that the Association of Women's Excellence in Supply Chain, it's like a long acronym, that they were partnering with MIT to give this scholarship. and I'm doing math because, math nerd. I'm running spreadsheets. I'm running just, I've finally finished paying off my undergrad loans, student loans, and my master's student loans. I'm finally debt free, right? Like that feeling when you are out of school and you have all these student loans and you're just like trying to chip away at them and you finally get rid of them. And now I'm sitting here running numbers and I'm like, oh, okay, do I really want to take out 6 figures in student loan debt for my 30th birthday? Like, so I know I'm in the running for the scholarship. And I'm kind of conflicted because I'm loving what I'm doing, but I also am at a point, once again, where you're reassessing, like, where do you want to be? What do you want to be doing? And up until this point, I had said I wanted to be this industry expert, and I had just gotten to do that for 5 years, and I was loving it. But I was also having this little bit of inferiority complex stuff creeping back in of like, okay, I think you need more knowledge. Like, I think if this is the path that you ultimately want to be end on, like, you need more knowledge, you need to go get more experience. And so I was kind of looking at whether or not this would be, I don't know. There was a lot of things going on, and comes January, I find out I didn't get the full scholarship, but I got half scholarship, which still would have brought the program to around $70,000 for a 1-year master's after scholarship. Yeah, but that includes living expenses. But MIT not cheap, right? So I'm like struggling mentally, internally, like, is this, like, can I justify this? Like, do I really want to take student loan debt out at this stage in my career and my path? And to top it all off, I got promoted to director at work. So now I'm like looking at it and I'm like, okay, I'm growing up through the ranks. There was a lot of moving parts, and I was like, I don't know what to do. And at the same time, one of my clients approached me at the time and said, hey, look, we know you're really knowledgeable. We have this position coming available that we think you'd be a great fit for, where it's kind of like being an internal company analyst where you're describing what's happening in the market and you're advising strategy. And I was like, well, that sounds like an interesting next step. So I turned down MIT. I broke my heart. Oh my gosh, my heart still hurts over it. Yeah, the expense, I couldn't say it. I couldn't do it. I decided to transition and go to the tech provider side, because that was the one side I hadn't worked on yet. Like, I worked in software, but it was within our own organization at Vistaprint. And so I decided instead at this point to go to a tech provider. I got in, realized that it was much more marketing heavy than strategy heavy, which was not my jam, right? Like, I am a strategy person, like I'm a tech person, like I'm there to work on solving problems. And I just really realized it wasn't my cup of tea. COVID hits as I'm figuring this all out. I had, internally tried to transition roles, but COVID hits, everything freezes. So now I'm in a role that I'm like knowing that I'm not going to excel in. It's not really my cup of tea. And then layoffs come and I get wiped out. So I'm out.
Oh, wow.
Right.
So you said no to MIT. You left this career that you really enjoyed. Oh, wow. That must have been, yeah. Wow. I could see where you were like, uh-oh.
Talk about a reality slap. So that was interesting. But to your point on networking, so I love people. Like, I'm a people person. So amazing relationships with so many people who I've met through the years in all different roles. So same day that everything kind of hit the fan, I texted 3 good friends, one who I'd known through a previous job, one who I had known as a previous client, and one who I met through the professional organization. And all I said was, okay, guys, looks like I'm job hunting. Same day I had an interview, which is crazy. As I got the news at 10:30, the shit hit the fan. Ignore my language.
It's fine. I'm surprised you haven't said something, because you've hinted so close the entire interview. I thought, like, oh, she's going to say it.
I worked in a warehouse. My language.
Yeah, you're allowed. This is logistics. I mean, it's not a clean language.
Yeah. Anyway, so and so I had an interview later that day at like 2:00 that afternoon. So it was on a Wednesday. And then on Thursday, I had 2 more interviews. Friday, I had another interview. The next week, I had 18 interviews, literally just from texting 3 friends. Like, didn't even apply. I just like texted a couple friends and said, this is what happened. And instantly, like, networks kicked into gear. And yeah, so then I landed a week and a half later. So ended up landing in my current role, which was exactly what I wanted to do. So I wanted to be product all along. So now I work in product. And it's really leading the strategy behind where the where our warehouse management product is going for our enterprise customers. So that's exciting. And yeah, it's been a whirlwind. But I knew also after some interesting, culture experiences across all the different companies, what I was looking for. And so my current company, so I work for Kerber Supply Chain. I had known them for years, and I knew the leadership team, and I really adored them. They're all like really good people and have really good just business acumen and are so smart. I always say to our CTO, I'm like, can I just absorb your brain, because he's just so smart. And yeah, I knew I wanted to be taking that knowledge from the ops side, but also just that general understanding of like what makes the market tick, like what is happening, what are our customers living through that's painful, and be able to drive that. So this has been the greatest transition. So I've been in role for 9 months now, and I'm having a blast. I'm loving working with my customers. I'm loving working with my stakeholders. Like, they're super sweethearts. But yeah, so it's been a wild journey, to say the least.
My gosh, like we are literally hitting the time limit. We're gonna have to have you come on and continue talking about this, but I love it. This journey is fascinating. If I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like the key things that I heard from this kind of your journey are get experience, create networks, and at the end of the day, like, people are like the most important thing. Like, as much as all this other stuff is, create good connections and be genuine.
We didn't even touch on the professional organization, so I know
Didn't
we're
even
out
come
of time.
close to all that stuff. I was like,
Shameless plug. Join a professional organization. I sit on CSCMP's board for young professionals. If you are a young professional who is looking to learn more about what all is happening in the industry, I cannot advocate enough. Join. I think for young professionals, it's wicked discounted. For students, it's really cheap. Please join. We like to help you guys network. And this is the beauty of this industry, is like, everyone wants to help each other. And I think it's really a testament. Doesn't matter if it's your peer or competitor, like, people want to help you get better. And so that's what I love about being part of professional organizations. So do it, join it, shameless plug. Anyway, yeah.
no shameless at all. We should be literally like, we should just do a weekly thing where you're like, here's the thing you should do this week, like, to help you out. I mean, you literally are a curriculum on what
I'm running
student
a
should be
book
doing.
club right now within my team at work of like articles from a different industry magazines. So
All right. We got to have you come back on. That's a fact. That we got to do this, and we got to continue, because like, now we just talked career. We haven't even talked about doing things, that type of stuff. I mean, usually we get into like wide supply chain and all that stuff. We're going to have to visit this again. Let's just give people right now best way to get in contact with you if they kind of want to connect and stuff like that. How do they reach out to you, Victoria?
LinkedIn me, ping me, drop a note. Hey, I heard you. What I always encourage folks not to do is just add someone on LinkedIn without saying anything. Please add a note. That way I know who you are or why you're reaching out. But definitely LinkedIn's the way to get in touch.
Oh yeah, because you probably get all the like salespeople being like, "Oh, I wonder if you could spend a little minute to look at my You're like, no, like, I know you saw a consultant in my background. You think that I'm doing this. You didn't do any research. Like, no, drop me a note that actually shows like why you want to connect. Trust me, I get those too. I'm a marketer, so as much as you hate all that stuff, I get the ones that come to me. I'm like, I'm a marketer, dude. Why would you come to me with such a lame kind of come at? Like, wouldn't you think a little bit more for this? But oh my gosh. Victoria, I cannot thank you enough. I cannot thank Kayla enough for just hooking us up and getting us to kind of like meet and stuff like this. This was a fantastic SCU30. I hope people took a lot away from this, and we'll definitely have you. We'll have to do a follow-up a little bit later because there's so much more we can talk about. Thank you so much for your time today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a great day. And that's our show. Do you know someone who could be an SCU30, or are you a supply chain professional under the age of 30? I want you on the show. Leave a comment in the comment section. I will be sure to get in touch with you. In the meantime, like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle McNaught. Rock and roll.